everyone, welcome back to another episode of the podcast Beautiful You. I'm your host Avantika. Today we have a very special guest with us. His name is Jake. He's 27. He runs a mental health based theater company with the aim of destigmatizing controversial mental health topics through the medium of art. He has a background in acting, so he uses his creative side to explore his antisocial personality disorder while also educating others. In addition to that, he's also a Mesopotamian pagan, right? That's how we pronounce it.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and a scribe of the ancient Sumerian language, which is humanity's first attested written language, which is so cool. Could you welcome to the podcast? First of all, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time and energy to be here.
No problem. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Before we dive into this episode, you guys know I advocate for therapy all the time. Beautiful You encourages you to seek the right professional help and care for you. This is where Amaha comes in. Amaha is a mental health care organization offering scientifically driven and evidence based high quality care through therapy, psychiatry, their community support, and self care app. Whether you're dealing with anxiety, depression, or any other severe condition, Amaha has about 140 plus psychologists and psychiatrists working to support you. You can access therapy and psychiatry services online as well as in person through their centers in Bangalore, Delhi, and Mumbai. Beautiful You listeners get a special discount. Use the code BY50 to get 50% off your first session with Amaha. Just download their app, it's called Amaha, AMAHA, or visit their website to book your first session with Amaha. And if you know someone who is struggling with mental health, share the love and the discount. Let's make mental health care accessible for everyone together. Invest in your mental health, you deserve it. Yeah, so let's start off with the ancient Sumerian language. What exactly is that?
Okay, so ancient Sumerian is, as I said, the first attested written language that we have so far in human history,
Mm-hmm.
and that sort of dates to around sort of 4,000, 3,500 BCE. That's when humans started writing things down, and it was used for things like administration purposes, like selling cattle and things like that. And it originates in what is modern day Iraq or southern Iraq, which was what Sumer was the name of the place.
Wow.
So yeah, that's a summary basically. Yeah.
Oh, that's crazy. Very interesting. So you've been diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. For those who don't know what it is, could you tell us a little bit about what is ASPD? It's short for ASPD. What is ASPD, and when were you? How old were you when you were diagnosed with it?
Okay. Yep. So ASPD or antisocial personality is a cluster B personality disorder. So it sits among other personality disorders like borderline, narcissistic, and histrionic personality disorder. And it's basically the sort of pervasive pattern of disregard for the rights of others, is how the DSM or the Diagnostic Manual categorizes it. And it's essentially a person who doesn't really care all that much about other people, and struggles to empathize with other people. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they are inherently violent or negative to those people. And I was diagnosed with ASPD when I was around 20. How old am I now? I'm 27. So yeah, about 25, 24, 25. I was officially diagnosed, but I've been suffering with it since childhood. But due to sort of the mental health services in the UK not being great,
Mhm.
I did struggle to get a diagnosis until like 2020. So it's it's been a rough ride.
What was your initial reaction to the diagnosis?
Well, I knew I had a personality disorder. It's something, as I've said, I've struggled with my entire life since I was a child. I always knew that I wasn't quite right, quote unquote normal.
Mhm.
And I was quite aggressive, and I didn't seem to care about things that everyone seemed to care about. like, the death of people. Nobody particularly personal to me, but just in general, like not really having an emotional response to things that people would normally have a response to. Yeah, and some quite violent qualities in myself growing up, and some sort of very hateful and misanthropic views that I sort of started to develop. And
Mhm.
as I got into like primary school and high school, I started to realize that that isn't how everyone else was being. That's not how everyone else was acting. So my reaction to getting diagnosed was sort of like I told you so moment. Like I knew that I just needed like I didn't need. I just felt like I wanted a professional to validate
Mhm.
how I was feeling. If that makes sense.
Was that validating getting the diagnosis?
I think so. Maybe not so much as I thought it was going to be,
Mhm.
but yes, having a sort of clinical psychiatrist listening to me and saying, "Yeah, I agree with your diagnosis." However, they added on a diagnosis, so they said that you do have ASPD, but you also sounds like you're suffering with traits of borderline personality disorder as well.
Mhm.
Um, which again, it's a cluster B personality disorder, so it kind of there is some natural overlap anyway, but it doesn't really that doesn't surprise me. So yeah.
Okay. 25 is fairly a very young age to be diagnosed with something like that. How did you cope with it? When especially when the psychiatrist also said that you might have some traits of BPD.
Um, when I mean the way I've coped with it, so to speak, is to sort of own it, if that makes sense. Like
Right.
instead of running away from it, I've kind of embraced it, and used my sort of platform that I've got now, to well, yeah, to destigmatize it and to give it another angle. Because that's another thing that you sort of go through when you get diagnosed with something, is like an imposter syndrome.
Mhm.
Like you almost think, no, that can't be me, that couldn't ever be me, or no, that's not quite right. But then when things start to settle and you start to realize and look at yourself from maybe an outside perspective, um, you start to realize that those things are true, and it's very relevant to my life. And um, but yeah, I don't let it define me in the sense that I don't sort of like I don't announce to people that's what I've got when I meet them, for example. I just try and live my life as best as I can,
Right.
you know, um, while having it, but I don't let it consume my being, if that makes sense.
Right. No, no, that makes perfect sense. So you also talked about how you're accepting it by being yourself through your platform that you have. So you started your Instagram page. That's how actually we met. It was very cool. I remember getting a follow from sponsored by ASPD. I think that's your username. So I
Yeah.
remember getting that, and I was like, "Oh, that's interesting, ASPD." And then because you don't see a lot of advocates who have been diagnosed with ASPD who openly talk about it. So I immediately went on that profile picture and I was like, oh, this is so cool. Like the work that you're doing is so inspiring because first of all, it's not talked about much. There is so much stigma around it. So people are ashamed of it and people are just scared to like openly talk about it because of the stigma attached to it, right? So the fact that you're so openly owning your story and you're so openly talking about it was so inspiring. So yeah, I came across the account and it's genuinely really educational content that you're putting out. So I wanted to ask, how did you start your Instagram account, and what is your goal with your Instagram account? You're so open about ASPD, so where do you see going it further down the line and stuff? Tell me more about it.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, it started back in like 2019, as a university project originally.
Mhm.
I've got a background in acting and theatre, which is what I studied at university for my degree. And there was a module where we had to basically get work experience, but I wanted to go down the route of creating my own work.
Mhm.
So I formed a theatre company with a few other people, a few of my peers, um, and we decided to go with obviously the name Antisocial Theatre, which, by the way, actually wasn't my. I didn't call it that. It was actually my friend at the time who came up with that name
Okay.
because we were talking about my diagnosis. He said, "Oh, this would be a good name," and it's stuck ever since. And that was my goal from the beginning, from the get go, was from that moment to destigmatize specifically antisocial personality disorder, um, because of what you said. You don't see a lot of people with my diagnosis speaking openly about it on the internet, um, but well, you do see people talking about it, but they're mostly quite anonymous. They keep themselves anonymous and sort of use pseudonyms and things like that. But whereas I didn't feel like I had anything to lose and everything, and actually everything to gain by being open and showing my face and my name and being open and honest about it. Like we're all going to die one day, so I don't want to sit there in regret and think, oh, I could have just been open and been honest about it. It would have made my life easier, sort of thing. But yeah, and it developed through like COVID. So we were originally, I originally wrote a play about my life and sort of my upbringing, and I used a lot of my creativeness to write the monologues and things like that. And the goal was to have that on stage, to perform that in front of an audience. However, due to COVID, obviously, like the theatre shut down. So instead of stopping our work and halting it, we decided to adapt and go sort of digital. Um, and my partner, Emily, who I run Antisocial Theatre with,
Mm.
um, it has like a media photography, videography background. That's what she does professionally. So we sort of collabed a little bit further down the line. We met at university, but a little bit later on, and we decided to collab and turn my monologues
Mhm.
into short films and make it a bit more digestible,
Wow.
and put it online. And that's what we started doing. We started making some of my monologues into like short little films or almost trailers and sticking them out and just seeing how people received it. And people really liked it. People really got it and understood it. And I feel like people relate more to art and poetry and songs than they do just writing. Like they need to take it in a digestible format. So that's basically the route that we went, and that's the route we're still going down today. We're just trying to become a bit more, um, adaptable to the internet and trying to collab with people like yourself and just. But the goal was and still is to educate as many people as possible about the reality of living with a personality disorder and not what the media tells you
Of course.
living with a personality disorder is like. Yeah, that's essentially
So
it.
that's such a good goal to have. That's such a noble goal to have, because getting the right information across is so important. What is some of the common misconceptions that you come across regarding ASPD?
Yeah, of course. So the common misconceptions is the sort of old age, psychopath, sociopath. Those are like the loaded, heated terms that people like to use. And well, a sociopath is like an informal, um, s- sometimes derogatory term
Mhm.
to define someone with ASPD. So a lot of people in the community don't use that phrase, for that reason, but some people, choose to claim it back, which is fine. Psychopath, again, people misuse that term. It's psychopathy and ASPD are under the same umbrella, but they are actually quite different, and you don't necessarily need to have psychopathy to have ASPD. But people with psychopathy do tend to have ASPD all the time. It's a little bit, it's not as black and white as people make it out, basically. But they're almost always using those terms to define a violent person or a serial killer or someone, some form of extreme violence is like the media perception, or extremely manipulative or abusive. Like, these terms become synonymous with people with ASPD, and it's just completely unfair. It's not rooted in like reality, and it's not rooted in truth. So that's the biggest misconception, that we're all like some sort of Ted Bundy, American Psycho kind of character, and it really isn't as black and white as that. So
Yeah,
yeah,
it's so unfair that these certain documentaries that we have, they've just like completely ruined the perception of ASPD and how the media falsely portrays it, to the point that people are just scared about it. And they continue to spread misinformation, which is so harmful, not just to the mental health community, but even just to the layman people who are not involved with it. Because, they hear something like psychopathy, or they hear something like antisocial personality disorder, and they just get scared about it. And that's really just a downfall to everyone moving forward. So moving like moving to the next question, I wanted to know, how was your childhood like? If you are comfortable talking about it, of course.
Yeah, no problem. I'm quite open. My childhood was pretty terrible. A quite a cliche upbringing for someone with ASPD, actually. I went through a very abusive childhood with my father. He was a very abusive man, physically, emotionally, and later we found out sexually as well. So he's just a really bad person all around, like the worst person you could think of. Um, and then when I grow up, so I moved away from him, and then had like a little bit of a quiet period where things were okay, so to speak. And then I went to school and got quite bullied because I was quite a large child. I've kind of always struggled with my weight as well. That's another thing I've struggled with. So I used to get bullied for being a bigger person. Um, and then I moved cities to another place when I was younger in like 2009. Started a new school and people were even worse there. People were even more horrible. My mum got a new partner, which is why we moved.
Mm.
And they got married. So my stepfather, he was also quite aggressive and violent, but he was violent in a different way. So he would drink. He was, and like I would class as an alcoholic. Like he couldn't go a day without it. He would smoke drugs and he'd drink, and then he'd, take it out on my mum, and then he'd like threaten me with violence. He never hurt me physically, but emotionally and like he would make me terrified of violence. He didn't need to hurt me. I was just scared he was going to all the time. And he'd often tell me things like he hates me and things like that. So he was just as violent, just not physically. Um, but there was sort of physical altercations between him and my mum. So that terrified me. And then I was bullied at school at the same time. So I didn't have any friends really. Um, and then at 16 years old, I became homeless. So my stepdad kicked me out, essentially, told me to get lost. And my mum just sort of stood there and took it. We could debate till the cows come home why that is. But um, so then I lived in like a homeless shelter for like young people. It's a place it's a place called Rotherham where I used to live. It's a really nice place called Rush House, and they help a lot of young people. So shout out to them. They're a really good bunch. And they helped me get on my feet. They helped me get like a little bed sit, like a little flat. And then yeah, that's I kind of just fended for myself really at that point. I kind of moved. I moved back in with my mum for a little bit during like lockdown, and I was sort of in and out with my mum's because I was terrible with financial. Like I had no skills financially, so I was sort of in and out of my mum's house for a little while. Um, but yeah, then I finally got out of that and finally moved to Manchester where I am now. So it's took me a long time to like really get away from that sort of childhood. Like it's always there in the back of my mind, and it's a big driving factor for my writing as well. Like the way I get out, um, sort of the way I get out my angry feelings, like my catharsis is through writing. So if anyone has already read my writing or goes on to read my writing after this, you'll see that the underlying villain in the stories is always my father. It's always him. Like he's the root cause of everything. So it's quite a heated topic for me. Like, but I don't mind talking about it. I'm such an open book. But yeah, it's been a tumultuous childhood to say the least.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. That does sound to be very dramatic. I'm so sorry that happened. Wow. Um, I don't know what to say because that just sounds awful. I'm glad that you're out, and I'm glad that you're doing better now. And yeah, I'm so proud of you because that's a long journey to come from. And
Thank you, I appreciate it.
of course. So, moving forward, a lot of people talk about how people struggle with compassion and empathy when you've been diagnosed with ASPD. So you live in a you're in a very healthy relationship with your partner, right? So how does and empathy is one of the crucial elements of any relationship, be it romantic or platonic. So how do you practice and value like compassion or empathy uh, in certain situations?
Yeah, that's a really good question, by the way.
Mhm.
So I've written about this before on the page. There's like there's different types of empathy. Um, so without going into detail about every single one of it quite well, is called cognitive empathy. So I'm able to understand why someone might feel upset. Like I use an example when I'm talking about this on my page, where if I had a friend that lost a load of money, for example, I can cognitively understand that they would be upset that they've lost money, because money is, we need it to live. So I understand that they would be upset. I
Mhm.
just don't have the emotional reaction to want to help them, if that makes sense. Like there's no like feeling or driving emotion in my head to want to help them, or
Right.
I almost and because of that, I'm almost dismissive when people are like upset around me. I almost become dismissive. Like
Mhm.
my brain almost kind of like shuts down, like naturally. I don't choose to be that way. It just kind of shuts down. Like I don't really know what to say. I don't really want to be there. I don't really want to say anything. However, because my connections with human beings are so few and far between, that when I do find someone that I genuinely click with, which was Emily, um, I do start to develop some sort of there's a bit more of a response. There's a bit more going on behind. Unfortunately, probably not as much as she deserves, But we never argue. That we literally never argue. If Emily suffers, by the way, with OCD, and she suffers with borderline personality disorder and like heightened anxiety and things like that. So she is quite what I would say emotional, or heightened emotion. Um, Whereas I'm quite low emotional, so I don't exhibit that much emotion. So it's kind of like yin and yang. We kind of balance each other out a little bit. Um, so where she would be upset, um, I can talk to her in a very calm and an emotionally detached sort of way. So it's like it's almost like I'm able to take the emotion out of it. So I'm able to give like a coherent and well put together response about whatever
Right.
situation she's going through. So it works out quite well. And also, as well, to mention, I talk about compassion on the page as well. About how to be compassionate. You don't have to feel that empathy or compassion for someone in order to act compassionately. So, for example, um, if an old woman fell over in the street in front of me, like I would help that woman up. I would pick that woman up and make sure she's not on the floor. So, but that doesn't mean I feel sorry for that woman. It doesn't mean I feel anything for her. I've just decided, I've made a choice to act compassionately and pick that woman up and help her. So you can act in any way you choose. You can, compassion is a choice,
Mhm.
basically, is what I talk about. But it doesn't mean I have to feel anything. And quite often there's people who do feel empathy and who are, quite heightened emotionally and are really nasty people. And they choose to be nasty to people. So, um, I've experienced it many times with many people. So, it's not a prerequisite for being nice, basically,
No,
is
I
my
love
point.
that. I love how you make it your own choice to be compassionate towards other people, regardless of if you feel empathy for them or not. It's always a choice, and that's what makes someone a good person when they're, selectively, like actively making a choice to help someone out there. What's the in your whole journey so far? What's the best and the worst piece of advice you got to manage your ASP?
The best piece of advice and the worst piece? That's a good question as well. um, I'd say the best piece of advice would be, or that I've received and that I agree with, is that you have to channel your impulses, because we're known to be quite impulsive people with ASPD. So you have to channel your impulses. You have to redirect them into something you actually like. So anyone who follows me knows that I've gone down numerous routes in order to try and change these impulses or redirect them. So I've done like jujitsu, like like sports, like grappling, wrestling, sort of sports. I did strongman, so lifting really heavy weights and picking up cars and things like that. I've done all that kind of stuff
Oh
before.
wow,
Um,
that's
I,
crazy.
obviously, I do writing as well, which is something I still do. And at the moment, I've transferred over to another sport, which is called High Rocks. So it's basically like running. It's like running and functional fitness kind of thing. So I'm constantly chasing something to fill that gap in my head or something to filter out the bad stuff, if that makes sense. So that's the best advice. The worst advice that I've received and that I do hear people talk about is that you can't do anything, that you basically should give in to those urges because there's nothing you can do. It's not your fault. It's how God's programmed you, kind of, that sort of lingo. And I completely disagree with it. And it's not just me. There's loads of other people in the mental health community online who suffer with ASPD who agree with me and also act in the same way that I do. They're just trying to get by. They're just trying to get through life. And, we're not all hell bent on manipulating people and murdering people. So it's, yeah, that's the worst piece of advice, to give into it, basically.
Love that. What's your own personal advice to someone who is struggling with ASPD?
My personal advice
Yeah.
is do not see it as a death sentence. Like, you are not destined to be this villain that everybody wants you to be. You are not the scapegoat for everybody else's problems. Like, you can choose to act compassionately, and I will just say as well, the reason you do act compassionately as someone with ASPD is because it benefits you to be compassionate, because people respond better to nice people. If you're nasty, you're not going to get the desired response and the desired surroundings and things like that. You're not going to be surrounded in a nice environment if you're being nasty to everybody, so it's not cost effective. But you need to realize that just because you feel that way, that doesn't mean that you're manipulating people in a bad way. Like, everybody manipulates people, like, whether they like to admit it or not. Um, but you just have to come to terms with it. So come to terms with who you are, accept that you're not a monster, and understand that you can be better than what people want you to be, should you choose to be, basically.
I love that. I love that so much. Before we come towards an end of the episode, is there something I missed out on that you would like to talk about?
Um, I think we've covered most of the things. I think the I sort of touched on it then at the end, but I'll just emphasize it, is that people with ASPD, I have said this on my page before, but I will just say it for the listeners as well. That I'm not saying that people with ASPD are the nicest people in the world and that we're all just misunderstood creatures with rainbows coming out of our heads. That's not true. Like, the reason that I was diagnosed with ASPD is because I was violent, I was aggressive, I've done some heinous things in the past. I've been arrested and nearly sent to prison for assault and violence and things like that. So, I used to take a lot of drugs, like, um, to get through. I used to drink a lot of alcohol and get involved with some pretty bad people. So it's not all sunshine and rainbows, and it hasn't been. But is that doesn't mean that that person can't change. Like, I've obviously changed. I'm not in jail, and I'm trying to make a life for myself. And
Mm-hmm.
there's many other people out there too. So there is a bad side, is basically what I mean. There is a bad side, but that doesn't mean that that person doesn't deserve a chance to be good, basically. And I think that I just wanted to nail that point, because I know a lot of people watch these podcasts and say, oh, well, they must have been diagnosed with ASPD for a reason. And you're absolutely right. That's true. But I'm just saying it doesn't mean that you're destined or inherently going to be violent to people. That's kind of the point I'm trying to make.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely agreed. Where can people find you?
So you can find us on Instagram. Um, that's Antisocial Theatre. We do have a Facebook, but we don't really use it, but that's Antisocial Theatre as well. And we are also migrating onto YouTube and TikTok, and those profile names are also Antisocial Theatre. And for my writing, if you're interested in the writing that I produce, you can find me on Instagram, and the @ for that is Diary of the Disordered, and that's my writing page.
All right, perfect. That sounds amazing. Thank you so much for your time here. I enjoyed this episode a lot. Thank you for all the work that you're doing and for being so honest about your journey. It reaches out to so many people, and it's going to be even more impactful moving forward. I wish you all the best for your future, plans, whatever you have going on for the episode, for the Instagram page. So yeah, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for your time.
Perfect. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and have a great new year.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, thank you so much for anyone who was stuck through this to the end of this episode. If you're listening to this on YouTube, do make sure that you leave us a comment down below. What is something that you took out of this episode? Like the episode, and yeah, subscribe if you haven't already. If you're listening to this on Spotify, if you like this episode, do give it a 5-star review. It will help us reach out to other listeners who might be interested in our podcast. It helps us a lot. And yeah, thank you so much for being here. I will see you guys in the next episode. I love you. Bye.